Tonight, as the world hums beyond your window, let's slip into the fog-draped villages of medieval Europe, where the mind was a battlefield and every shadow hid a demon. Picture yourself as a weary weaver, your thoughts tangled like the threads you spin, haunted by whispers of madness in a world ruled by fear. Dim the lights, fluff your pillow, and maybe crack a window for that cool night breeze. Because this journey into the gritty, superstitious heart of the Middle Ages will make your modern stresses feel like a holiday. Before we dive in, give this video a gentle like if you're craving a tale that's equal parts history and hypnotic escape, and subscribe to keep these bedtime stories coming. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from and what's the clock saying? Ready? Let's unravel what mental health meant when crazy could get you chained to a church wall. The first light of dawn barely sneaks through the cracks of your wooden shack, a flimsy pile of planks that groans against the wind like it's begging to collapse. You're sprawled on a lumpy straw mattress, the kind that feels more like sleeping on a pile of regrets than a bed. The air is thick with the sour tang of smoke from last night's fire, mingling with the faint reek of damp wool and unwashed bodies. Outside, a rooster screams as if it's personally offended by the sunrise, while the distant wail of a neighbor's baby slices through the morning chill. Your back aches from yesterday's endless hours at the loom, and your mind, oh, your mind is already churning. Thoughts of the day ahead, the village gossip about demons in the head, and the ever-present fear of being labeled touched by madness swirl like a storm you can't outrun. Welcome to England, 1372, where waking up feels less like a fresh start and more like stepping into a gauntlet. You roll off the mattress, your bare feet hitting the cold, packed earth floor with a jolt that reminds you how little this world cares for comfort. The room is dark, save for those miserly slivers of light, and the walls seem to lean in, whispering that today might be the day you slip, say the wrong thing, dream the bad dream, and end up on the wrong side of the priest's judgment. In medieval Europe, a troubled mind wasn't just a personal burden. It was a public scandal, a sign you danced too close to the devil's fire. You pull on a rough tunic, its fibers scratching your skin like an accusation, and try to shake off the weight of last night's nightmare. A jumbled mess of shadowy figures and church bells that left you sweating in the dark. Back then, dreams weren't just dreams. They were omens, and a bad one could mark you as cursed. You can't help but wonder, what if the village hears about it? Stepping outside, the village greets you with a gray drizzle that clings to your skin like despair. The air smells of mud and manure, and the narrow path to the common house is a slick trap of ruts and puddles. Your neighbors, hunched figures in patched cloaks, shuffle past, their eyes darting as if they're all hiding something or watching for someone else's sin. Mental health, though they didn't call it that, was a tightrope walk in this era. One wrong step, too much weeping, too many visions, or even too much silence could see you branded as possessed. The church, that towering shadow over every village, taught that a troubled mind was a battlefield where God and Satan wrestled, and guess who they blamed if you were losing? You pause by a crooked fence, catching your breath, and notice a crudely carved cross nailed to a post. It's a reminder: pray hard, think pure, or risk everything. The shock hits when you overhear two women whispering by the well, their voices low but sharp. Old Marjorie's gone mad, one says, her words dripping with fear and scorn, screaming about angels in the night. Father Thomas says it's the devil's work. Your stomach twists. Marjorie, the widow who baked bread for the village, now locked in her hut, waiting for the priest's cleansing. Maybe they'll pray over her. Maybe they'll chain her to the church floor. Or worse, call her a witch and let the mob decide her fate. In 1372, no one knew about serotonin or therapy. Madness was a spiritual failing, and the cure was often crueler than the affliction. You clench your fists, your nails biting into your palms, and vow to keep your own fears buried deep. But as you trudge toward the common house, the question gnaws: how long can you hide your own trembling thoughts? This moment, this suffocating blend of dread and duty, mirrors the resilience it took to survive back then. Every day was a test, not just of your body, but of your ability to mask the chaos within. Compare that to now, where we have therapists and hotlines, yet still wrestle with stigma and shame. The medieval weaver in you would marvel at our pills and podcasts, but they'd also nod in recognition at the universal human struggle to keep the mind from cracking under pressure. As you reach the common house, the faint warmth of the fire inside beckons, a fleeting promise of solace. You step in, shaking off the rain, and brace for the day. Survival, then and now, demands a stubborn kind of courage, one that doesn't shout, but whispers through every choice to keep going. The door of the common house creaks like it's auditioning for a ghost story, and you step into a dim, smoky room that smells like burnt barley and desperation. The fire in the hearth spits feeble sparks, barely warming the damp air, while a dozen villagers huddle around a rough-hewn table, their faces etched with the kind of exhaustion that clings like wet wool. You're a weaver in England, 1372, and breakfast is no Instagram-worthy spread, just a bowl of lumpy porridge that looks like it's been scraped from the bottom of a dream. The oats are gritty, the texture somewhere between mud and regret, and you wash it down with a swig of ale so watery it's practically an insult. No coffee, no fruit, no mercy. Your stomach grumbles, but you spoon it down anyway, because hunger doesn't negotiate, and in this world, a full belly is a luxury that outshines gold. You sit on a wobbly stool, the wood digging into your bones, and glance at your neighbors. There's John, the blacksmith, whose hands are scarred like a battlefield, and Agnes, the brewer, whose eyes dart nervously as if she's hiding a secret or dreading one. The talk is low, cautious, circling the latest village scandal, a farmer named Thomas who's been seeing things in the fields at night. Heard he's talking to spirits, Agnes mutters, her voice barely above a whisper. Father William says it's the devil's tongue. Your spoon freezes midair. In medieval Europe, a troubled mind wasn't just a private struggle, it was a public alarm bell, ringing out your sins for all to judge. The church taught that visions or voices were Satan's fingerprints, and Thomas's fate, prayers, chains, or worse, hangs over the table like a storm cloud. You chew slowly, the porridge sticking in your throat, and wonder if your own restless thoughts could betray you. The room feels smaller now, the walls closing in with every word. You notice how the others avoid Thomas's name, as if saying it might summon the devil himself. Mental health, though they had no such term, was a minefield in this era. A single rumor could turn a neighbor into a pariah, a friend into a suspect. The church's grip was ironclad, preaching that a mad mind was a soul lost to sin, and the cures, Holy water, fasting, or a priest's stern rebuke often left you worse off than before. You glance at the cross hanging above the hearth, its shadow flickering in the firelight, and feel a chill that has nothing to do with the morning cold. What if your sleepless nights, your nagging fears were noticed? What if someone saw you pause too long by the river, staring into the water like it held answers? In 1372, silence was your only shield, but even that could crack. Then comes the shock, sharp as a blade, through the fog of chatter. Agnes leans in, her voice a hiss. They took Thomas to the church last night, locked him in the crypt, saying he's got to face the demons. Your heart lurches. The crypt, dank, airless, a stone tomb for the living, is where they send the possessed to be cleansed. You've heard the stories, men and women, screaming for days, left to battle their minds in darkness while priests chant above. Some come out quiet, broken. Others don't come out at all. The porridge sours in your mouth, and you push the bowl away, appetite gone. Thomas wasn't mad, you think. He was grieving, his wife lost to the plague, his fields barren. But grief, like any crack in the mind, was a doorway for the devil, and the village doesn't forgive weakness. You stare at your hands, rough from the loom, and pray they don't tremble when the priest looks your way. This moment, this suffocating dance of fear and survival, lays bare the resilience it took to live in such a world. Every bite of that miserable porridge, every forced smile, was an act of defiance against a society that saw your mind as a potential traitor. Compare that to today, where we have therapy apps and support groups, yet still shy away from admitting our struggles. The medieval weaver in you would scoff at our lattes and yoga, but they'd envy our freedom to speak, or at least whisper, about the weight we carry. As you rise from the table, the fire pops, a fleeting burst of warmth in the gloom. You step back into the rain, your mind heavier than your empty bowl, and brace for the day's next trial. Survival then and now is a quiet kind of heroism, stitched together one careful step at a time. The rain hasn't stopped, just softened into a miserable drizzle that soaks your tunic and turns the village path into a slop of mud and despair. You're a weaver in England, 1372, trudging toward the workshop, your bare feet squelching with every step as if the earth itself is trying to swallow you whole. The air smells of wet hay and something sour, maybe the rotting scraps from last week's market, and the gray sky presses down like a priest's judgment. Your shoulders ache from yesterday's work, but it's your mind that feels heavier, tangled with whispers of the village's latest fear. Madness, the devil's shadow, creeping through the minds of good folk. Each step is a battle against the cold, the mud, and the nagging thought that one wrong word, one stray glance, could mark you as touched. In medieval Europe, a troubled mind wasn't just a burden, it was a death sentence dressed in holy robes. The path winds past crooked huts, their thatched roofs sagging like tired old men. Villagers shuffle by, their faces half hidden under hoods, but their eyes catch yours for a fleeting second, sharp and suspicious as if they're searching for cracks in your soul. You pass the church, its stone walls looming like a stern parent, the bell tolling low and slow, a reminder that God is watching, and so is Father William. In this era, mental health was a public affair, a tightrope stretched over a pit of whispers and chains. The church taught that a mind gone astray was Satan's playground, and the village was quick to point fingers. You've seen it before, a woman who wept too long after her child died, a man who spoke to the air, both dragged to the church for cleansing. You pull your cloak tighter, the damp wool chafing your neck, and quicken your pace, hoping to outrun the weight of their stares. The workshop isn't far now, just past the blacksmith's forge, where the clang of hammer on iron cuts through the drizzle like a warning. Your mind drifts to last night's dream, dark shapes in a fog, a voice calling your name, and a cold hand on your shoulder. Dreams weren't just dreams in 1382, they were messages, and a bad one could land you in the priest's crosshairs. You shake your head, trying to scatter the thought, but it clings like the mud on your heels. The church's grip on mental health was absolute, blending fear with faith in a way that made every worry feel like a sin. If you told anyone about your sleepless nights, your racing heart, they'd say you'd invited the devil in for tea. You mutter a quick prayer under your breath, the words tasting like ash, and hope it's enough to keep the shadows at bay. Then comes the shock, sharp and cold as a blade in the dark. As you round the corner to the workshop, you see a crowd gathered by the old oak, their voices a low, angry hum. In the center stands Ellen, the miller's wife, her hands bound, her face pale as death. "She's cursed us," a man shouts, his finger jabbing the air. "Saw her muttering by the river, calling the devil." Your heart stops. Ellen, who shared her bread with you last winter, who sang hymns with a voice like sunlight, is now accused of witchcraft because she's been strange since her husband died. The crowd parts, and Father William steps forward, his cross glinting in the dim light, his voice booming about sin and salvation. In medieval Europe, grief could be a crime, and a woman's sorrow was a spark for the witch hunter's fire. Ellen's eyes meet yours, wide with terror, and you look away, shame burning your throat. She'll face the church crypt, or worse, and there's nothing you can do but keep walking. This moment, this gut punch of fear and powerlessness, reveals the brutal courage it took to survive in a world where your mind could betray you. Every step you take toward the workshop is a defiance of the paranoia that choked medieval life. Compare that to today, where we have therapists and hotlines, yet still hesitate to admit our struggles, afraid of judgment's quieter sting. The weaver in you would gape at our world, medication, mindfulness, freedom to speak, but they'd recognize the same stubborn will to keep moving forward. As you reach the workshop, the creak of the door feels like a small victory, a promise of work to drown out the fear. You step inside, the smell of wool and dust wrapping around you, and brace for the day's next trial. Survival, then and now, is a tapestry woven from countless, quiet acts of endurance. The workshop door groans shut behind you, sealing you into a dim, musty world of wool and worry. You're a weaver in England, 1372, and the air here is thick with dust motes that dance in the slivers of light leaking through cracked shutters. The loom looms, pun intended, like a wooden beast, its threads taut and unforgiving, waiting for your trembling hands to tame it. Your fingers, calloused and raw, fumble with the shuttle, and every clack of the pedals feel like a heartbeat, loud enough to drown out the village's whispers, but not the gnawing fear in your gut. Ellen's bound hands, her terrified eyes, haunt you, and the rumor of her devil's talk clings like damp rot. In medieval Europe, a mind that wandered too far, whether from grief or exhaustion, was a traitor, and you're starting to wonder if yours is plotting against you. You settle into the rhythm, the looms creak a grim lullaby, but your thoughts keep slipping. Last night's dream, those dark shapes, that cold voice, feels like a warning, and the church's teachings make it clear. Stray thoughts are Satan's breadcrumbs. Mental health, though no one called it that, was a battlefield where doubt was a sin and fear a confession. You glance at your fellow weavers, their heads bowed, their hands steady, but you catch the tightness in their jaws, the way they avoid each other's eyes. Everyone's hiding something, a sleepless night, a forbidden worry, a flicker of anger at the priest's latest sermon. In 1372, silence was survival, but it was also a cage, locking your fears inside until they festered. You misread a warp, the mistake glaring like a curse, and curse under your breath, hoping no one notices. Mistakes here aren't just flaws, they're evidence of a troubled soul. The workshop is a furnace of tension, the air heavy with unspoken rules. You've heard the stories. A weaver in the next village, dismissed for muttering too much, was sent to the church for cleansing and never returned. The church's grip on mental health was a vice, squeezing every thought through the filter of sin and salvation. If you spoke of your racing heart, your dread of the dark, they'd say you'd invited the devil to dinner. You focus on the loom, the shuttle flying back and forth, but your mind betrays you, replaying Ellen's accusation. Was she mad or just broken by loss? And what's the difference when the village decides your fate? Your chest tightens, and you pause, pretending to adjust a thread, but you're trying to breathe through the panic that feels like a stone on your ribs. Then comes the shock, slicing through the workshop's drone like a blade. The door bangs open, and Father William strides in, his black robes sweeping the floor like a storm cloud. God sees all, he booms, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on you just long enough to make your blood freeze. The devil preys on idle minds. Your hands shake, the shuttle slips, and you fumble to catch it, praying he doesn't see. He's here because of Ellen, you're sure, checking for others who might be tainted. In medieval Europe, a priest's visit wasn't comforting. It was a hunt, and a troubled mind was the prey. You force your hands to move, your face blank, but inside you're screaming. One wrong move, one stray word, and you could be next, dragged to the crypt, your name whispered as the village's newest cautionary tale. This moment, this knife-edge balance of fear and focus, shows the raw grit it took to survive a world that policed your thoughts. Every thread you weave is a quiet rebellion against the paranoia that defined medieval life. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and hotlines, yet still shy away from admitting our cracks. The weaver in you would marvel at our freedom to seek help, but they'd nod at the shared struggle to keep the mind from unraveling. As Father William leaves, the door thudding shut, you exhale, the loom's rhythm steadying your pulse. Survival, then and now, is a stubborn thread, woven through every choice to keep going despite the shadows. The workshop hums with the clack of looms, but the air is taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. You're a weaver in England, you have 1372, hunched over your work, the wool's coarse bite a familiar sting against your fingers. Father William's earlier visit left a chill that lingers, his words about idle minds echoing like a curse. Your heart hasn't stopped racing, each beat a reminder of Ellen's fate, bound and accused, her grief twisted into proof of devilry. In medieval Europe, mental health was a minefield, where a stray thought or a sleepless night could brand you a sinner. You keep your eyes on the threads, weaving as if your life depends on it, because it might. The other weavers are silent, their faces masks of focus, but you see the fear in their tight lips, the way they flinch at every creak of the door. Madness, or what they called madness, wasn't just a personal failing, it was a village betrayal. Then the door creaks again, and your stomach lurches. Father William is back, his shadow filling the room like a storm cloud swallowing the sun. He moves slowly, his robes rustling, a wooden cross swinging from his belt like a warning. God's eyes are upon you, he says, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the workshop's drone. You keep weaving, your hands moving on instinct, but your mind is a riot of panic. In 1372, priests weren't just shepherds of souls, they were hunters of demons, and a troubled mind was their quarry. The church taught that doubt, fear, and even sorrow were cracks where Satan slipped in, and Father William's here to sniff out the next crack. You feel his gaze on you, heavy as a millstone, and your shuttle slips, the thread snarling. You curse silently, praying he doesn't notice because a mistake now could be read as a sign of inner chaos. He stops beside you, close enough that you smell the incense clinging to his robes, a sickly sweet reminder of the church's power. Have you been troubled, child? He asks, his tone soft but laced with menace, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Your mouth goes dry. In medieval Europe, a question like this was a trap. Admit to worry, and you're halfway to the crypt. Deny too quickly, and you're hiding something. You mumble about long hours, the loom's demands, anything to sound ordinary, but your voice shakes, betraying you. Mental health wasn't a concept here, just sin and salvation, and the church decided which was which. You think of Ellen, locked in darkness, and wonder if she answered wrong. Your fingers fumble, the loom's rhythm faltering, and Father William's eyes narrow, searching for the devil in your hesitation. You force a smile, the kind that hurts, and pray it's enough to keep him moving. The shock comes when he leans closer, his breath hot on your ear. The devil speaks in dreams, he whispers, and I hear you've been restless. Your blood turns to ice. Someone talked, maybe a neighbor, a jealous weaver, spilling your sleepless nights to the priest. In 1372, dreams were evidence, and a restless mind was a courtroom where you were already guilty. You stammer a denial, but he raises a hand, silencing you, and moves on, leaving you trembling. The crypt looms in your mind, a stone grave for the living, where cleansing meant screams and starvation. You grip the loom, the wood grounding you, and weave faster, as if you can outrun the accusation. Survival here meant burying your fears deeper than the dead. This moment, this razor-thin escape, lays bare the courage it took to live under such scrutiny. Every word, every glance was a gamble in a world that saw your mind as a potential traitor. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and open conversations, yet still fear judgment's sting. The weaver in you would envy our freedom to seek help, but they'd salute the shared fight to keep going. As Father William leaves, the door thudding shut, you breathe again, the looms clack a fragile lifeline. Survival, the then and now, is a quiet defiance, woven through every choice to face another day. The workshop spits you out into the damp noon air, your hands cramped from the loom's relentless demands, and your mind bruised from Father William's prying. You're a weaver in England, 1372, and the village feels like a cage, its muddy paths and watchful eyes closing in. You trudge toward the old oak at the edge of the common, its gnarled branches a fleeting promise of shade in a world that offers little mercy. The drizzle has stopped, leaving the ground slick and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and distant smoke. Your tunic clings to your skin, a soggy second skin, and your stomach growls, unimpressed by the morning's meager porridge. In medieval Europe, a troubled mind was a secret you buried deep. But under this tree, with the village's hum at a distance, you dare to breathe, hoping for a moment to untangle the knots in your thoughts. You slump against the oak's rough bark, its solid weight a rare comfort in a life of sharp edges. A few other workers join you, John the blacksmith, Agnes the brewer, each carrying their own silent burdens. You share a crust of rye bread, its texture like chewing on a grudge, and pass around a leather flask of tepid water. No one speaks of Ellen, locked away in the church crypt, or the priest's warnings about devil's dreams. In 1372, mental health was a forbidden topic, a specter that could turn a neighbor into a stranger. The church preached that sorrow or doubt was a sin, and the village enforced it with whispers and shunning. You tear off a piece of bread, the act mechanical, and listen to the sparrows chattering above, their carefree notes a cruel contrast to the weight in your chest. For a moment, you close your eyes, letting the breeze cool your face and pretend you're free of fear. But freedom is a fantasy here, and the silence among you is thick with unspoken rules. You notice Agnes's hands tremble as she sips from the flask, her eyes darting to the path as if expecting Father William to appear. John mutters about a bad harvest, his voice low, but you catch the edge of panic. Another season of hunger could break more than bellies. In medieval Europe, mental health wasn't just personal, it was communal, a fragile balance that one mad soul could tip. The church's shadow loomed large, teaching that a troubled mind was a contagion, and the village was quick to quarantine it. You shift against the tree, the bark biting your back, and try to ignore the memory of your own restless nights, the dreams that feel like accusations. If anyone knew, would they sit this close? Your bread tastes like ash now, but you swallow it because survival means pretending everything's fine. Then comes the shock, a jolt that snaps your eyes open. A scream cuts through the village, high and raw, coming from the church. The three of you freeze, bread forgotten, as the sound twists into a wail that's all too human. "It's Ellen," Agnes whispers, her voice barely audible, her face pale as bone. The crypt's cleansing has begun. Prayers, holy water, maybe worse, and Ellen's cries are proof it's no gentle cure. In 1372, mental health treatment was a gauntlet, often more brutal than the affliction itself. The church saw madness as demonic possession, and healing meant breaking the body to save the soul. You grip the grass, your knuckles white, and feel the village's eyes on you, even from this distance. Ellen's screams fade, but the silence that follows is heavier, a warning to keep your own mind locked tight. This moment, this stolen pause under the oak, reveals the fierce resilience it took to endure a world that feared your thoughts. Every shared crust, every forced calm, was a quiet victory over paranoia's grip. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and support, yet still wrestle with stigma's echoes. The weaver in you would envy our openness, but they'd respect the shared struggle to carry on. As you rise, brushing dirt from your tunic, the oak stands firm, a silent witness to your survival. You head back to the workshop, Ellen's wail still ringing, and brace for the afternoon's wait. Courage, then and now, is the stubborn choice to face the next step, no matter how heavy. The oak's shade is a distant memory as you slog back through the village, the mud sucking at your feet like it's got a personal grudge. You're a weaver in England, 1372, and the noon air is thick with the stench of damp straw and fear. Ellen's screams from the church crypt still echo in your skull, a grim reminder that a troubled mind is a one-way ticket to ruin. The path to the workshop is lined with hunched figures, their cloaks sodden, their eyes sharp as knives. They don't speak, but their glances cut, each one a silent question. Are you next? In medieval Europe, mental health was a communal tightrope, and one slip, a stray word, a nervous tick, could send you plummeting. Your tunic chafes, your hands ache, and your heart hammers with the weight of secrets you can't afford to spill. Survival means keeping your fears locked tighter than a lord's treasure chest. You pass the baker's hut, where the smell of fresh bread mocks your empty stomach. A cluster of women huddle by the door, their voices low, their words slicing through the drizzle like shards of glass. Ellen wasn't right, one hisses, always muttering, staring at nothing. Another nod, her face hard. She brought it on herself. Your steps falter. Ellen, who sang hymns and shared her crusts, is now a cautionary tale, her grief twisted into proof of devilry. In 1372, the church taught that a troubled mind was Satan's signature, and the village was quick to ink the verdict. Mental health wasn't a struggle to be helped. It was a stain to be scrubbed out, often with prayers or worse. You pull your cloak tighter, as if it could shield you from their judgment, and hurry on, your pulse loud enough to drown out the church bell's toll. The workshop looms ahead, its sagging roof a grim welcome, but the whispers follow you like shadows. You catch snippets from passers-by, talk of curses and demons, of Ellen's fate as a warning to all. The village is a tinderbox, and in a troubled mind is the spark. You've seen it before, a man shunned for weeping too long, a girl locked away for visions that were likely hunger's tricks. The church's grip on mental health was a noose, tightening with every sermon about sin and salvation. You think of your own sleepless nights, the dreams that claw at your peace, and wonder how long you can hide them. One wrong move, a tremble, a sigh too loud, and you're Ellen, your name a curse on every tongue. You clench your fists, nails biting your palms, and force your face into a mask of calm, though your insides churn like a storm-tossed sea. Then comes the shock, a gut punch that stops you cold. A boy, no older than 12, darts past, his eyes wild, shouting, "They're burning Ellen's things." You spin toward the village square, where a small crowd gathers around a smoldering pile, her shawl, her wooden bowl, her life reduced to ash. The priest stands watch, cross raised, chanting about cleansing the devil's taint. In 1372, mental health wasn't treated. It was erased, and Ellen's belongings were just the start. The crowd murmurs, some nodding, others pale, but none dare speak against it. Your throat tightens, bile rising. Ellen's not even dead, yet her existence is already kindling, a warning to keep your mind in line. You turn away, the smoke stinging your eyes, and stumble toward the workshop, praying no one saw your horror. This moment, this suffocating web of fear and silence, shows the raw nerve it took to live in a world that burned your humanity for sport. Every step you take is a defiance of the paranoia that choked medieval life. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and compassion, yet still shy away from our shadows. The weaver in you would marvel at our openness, but they'd salute the shared grit to keep standing. As you reach the workshop, the door's creak is a lifeline, pulling you back to work, to survival. Courage, then and now, is the quiet choice to face the next hour, despite the whispers. The workshop releases you as the sun dips, painting the sky a bruised purple that mirrors the ache in your bones. You're a weaver in England, 1372, trudging home through a village that feels more like a trap than a haven. The mud underfoot clings like guilt, and the air carries the acrid tang of smoke from Ellen's burned belongings, a grim reminder of her erasure. Your hands throb from the loom's demands, but it's your mind that's raw, scraped by the day's whispers and the priest's probing gaze. In medieval Europe, mental health was a silent war, where every worry was a potential betrayal, and the village's eyes were always watching. Your tunic, damp and heavy, chafes with every step, and the distant howl of a dog sends a shiver down your spine. Home is close, but safety feels as distant as the stars blinking through the gathering dusk. The path winds past the church, its silhouette a stern sentinel against the fading light. The crypt's silence is louder than Ellen's screams, and you quicken your pace, avoiding the shadow of the cross atop its spire. In 1372, the church didn't just guide souls, it policed minds, branding sorrow or doubt as devil's work. Mental health wasn't a struggle to be eased, but a sin to be purged, often with prayers or chains. You think of your own restless nights, the dreams that twist like thorns, and wonder how long you can keep them buried. The village is a web of suspicion, and one loose thread, a sigh too heavy, a glance too long, could unravel you. Children's laughter drifts from the square, their clay dolls scattered in the dirt, and for a moment, their joy stings, a reminder of a lightness you've lost under the weight of fear. You pass the baker's hut, where the scent of barley stew wafts through the cracks, a faint promise of warmth. But the women outside, their voices low, are still dissecting Ellen's fate, their words sharp as flints. She should have prayed harder, one mutter, and your stomach twists. In medieval Europe, mental health was a communal verdict, and the village was judge and jury. You've seen it before, a man shunned for muttering, a woman locked away for weeping. The church's teachings made every crack in the mind a doorway for demons, and the cure was often crueler than the affliction. You pull your cloak tighter as if it could block their words, and focus on the path, each step a small rebellion against the paranoia that chokes this place. Your home, a sagging shack of wood and thatch, is in sight, but the weight of the day clings like damp rot. Then comes the shock, a jolt that stops your heart. A figure steps from the shadows, a neighbor, Thomas, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. "They're coming for me," he whispers, his voice cracking. "Heard I was talking in my sleep, cursing God." Your blood runs cold. Thomas, who helped you mend your roof last spring, is now a marked man, his grief over a lost child twisted into proof of possession. In 1372, mental health was a death sentence by rumor, and the church's cleansing could mean anything from prayers to a pyre. He grabs your arm, desperate, but you pull away, shame burning your throat. You mumble something about work, avoiding his eyes, and hurry on, the village's silence roaring in your ears. Thomas's fate is sealed, and you're powerless to stop it. This moment, this gut-wrenching choice to turn away, lays bare the brutal strength it took to survive a world that devoured the vulnerable. Every step toward home is a defiance of the fear that ruled medieval life. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and empathy, yet still shy away from our shadows. The weaver in you would envy our openness, but they'd nod at the shared fight to keep standing. As you reach your door, the faint glow of a fire inside beckons, a fragile shield against the dark. You step in, Thomas's whisper still haunting, and brace for the night. Survival, then and now, is a quiet courage, stitched through every choice to face another dawn. The door of your shack grown shut, sealing you into a world of flickering shadows and faint warmth. You're a weaver in England, 1372, and the night wraps the village in a suffocating hush, broken only by the distant howl of a wolf. The fire in the hearth sputters, its glow barely touching the damp walls of your home, a crumbling pile of wood and thatch that feels more like a cage than a refuge. Your family, your wife, 2 children, kneel beside you before a small wooden cross, its edges worn smooth by desperate hands. Thomas's whispered warning, his hollow eyes, cling to your mind like damp rot, and the village's judgment of Ellen's madness weighs heavier than the day's labor. In medieval Europe, mental health was a battlefield where fear was a sin and prayer was your only weapon. You light a tallow candle, its acrid smoke stinging your eyes, and begin the nightly ritual, hoping to keep the demons, real or imagined, at bay. Your wife's voice, soft but strained, leads the prayer, a plea for God's mercy on your souls. The children mumble along, their small hands clasped, their eyes darting to the dark corners as if expecting the devil to slink out. In 1372, the church taught that a troubled mind was Satan's playground, and nighttime was his favorite hour. Mental health wasn't a struggle to be understood, but a test of faith, and failure meant damnation, or worse, the crypt. You think of your own sleepless nights, the dreams that claw at your peace, and wonder if they're a sign you've strayed. The village is a spider's web, and one tremor, a whispered doubt, a moment of despair, could trap you. Your knees ache against the cold earth floor, but you stay still, the cross's shadow looming over you like a silent judge. The prayer falters, and you swallow hard, tasting fear in the smoky air. The hearth's glow feels fragile, a thin shield against the night's weight. You glance at your wife, her face etched with lines of worry, and wonder if she's hiding her own fears. In medieval Europe, mental health was a communal burden, and the family was the first line of defense, or betrayal. You've heard of wives turning in husbands, children reporting parents, all to escape the stain of madness. The church's grip was ironclad, preaching that doubt or sorrow was a crack for demons to slip through, and the village enforced it with shunning or worse. Your daughter shifts, her small voice breaking the silence with a question about Ellen, and your heart lurches. You hush her too sharply and see the fear in her eyes. The truth that Ellen's grief was branded as devilry is too heavy for a child, but it's a lesson you all learn eventually. You pull her close, the warmth of her small body a fleeting comfort, and resume the prayer, your voice hollow. Then comes the shock, a sound that rips through the night like a blade. A pounding at the door, loud and urgent, shakes the shack. Your family freezes, the prayer dying on your lips. Open in the name of God, a voice bellows. Father William's unmistakable. Your blood turns to ice. In 1372, a priest at your door after dark meant one thing. Someone's been accused, and Thomas's warning flashes through your mind. Mental health was a death sentence by rumor, and a nighttime visit was the gavel's fall. You stumble to the door, your hands trembling, and crack it open to see the priest's stern face, his cross glinting in the candlelight. "We need to speak," he says, his eyes boring into you. Your throat closes, Thomas's fate and Ellen's screams roaring in your ears, and you realize you might be next. This moment, this heart-stopping dread, reveals the raw courage it took to face a world that hunted your thoughts. Every prayer was a shield against paranoia's blade. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and support, yet still fear judgment's echo. The weaver in you would envy our freedom, but they'd salute the shared grit to endure. As you step aside, letting the priest in, the fire flickers, a fragile light against the dark. Survival, then and now, is a stubborn flame, burning through every choice to face the next trial. The fire in your shack gutters low, casting long shadows that dance like specters across the walls. You're a weaver in England, 1372, collapsed onto a straw mattress that feels more like a grudge than a bed. Father William's late-night visits, his probing questions about your thoughts and dreams, has left your heart pounding, a drumbeat of dread that drowns out the wolf's howl outside. The air is thick with the sour tang of tallow and fear, and your family, huddled in the dark, breathes softly, their prayers for protection still hanging in the smoky haze. In medieval Europe, mental health was a gauntlet, where every worry was a potential sin, and sleep was a battlefield where demons prowled. You pull a threadbare blanket over your aching body, the cold seeping through, and try to quiet your mind, but Ellen's screams and Thomas's hollow eyes claw at your thoughts like thorns. Your eyes trace the ceiling's cracks, each one a map of the village's suspicions. In 1372, the church taught that a troubled mind was Satan's canvas, and dreams were his brushstrokes. Mental health wasn't a struggle to be soothed, but a trial to be endured, with salvation as the only prize. You think of your own nightmares, shadows that whisper your name, a cold hand on your heart, and wonder if they're proof you've strayed. The village is a noose, tightening with every rumor, and Father William's warning about restless souls feels like a sentence. Your wife shifts beside you, her breath uneven, and you wonder if she's hiding her own fears, too scared to speak. In this world, silence is your shield, but it's also a weight, pressing down until your thoughts feel like stones. You close your eyes, praying for dreamless sleep, but the darkness is no friend. The night is a thief, stealing your peace with every creak of the shack. You imagine the crypt, where Ellen might still be, her mind broken by cleansing that's more torture than cure. In medieval Europe, mental health was a communal verdict, and the church's remedies, holy water, fasting, chains, often killed the spirit faster than the devil could. You clutch the blanket, your knuckles white, and try to focus on the cross by the hearth, its faint outline of flicker of hope. Salvation, they say, comes to those who endure, but endurance feels like a betrayal when it means turning from friends like Thomas. Your mind spirals, questioning if God sees your fear as weakness, if heaven is worth this earthly hell. The wolf howls again, closer now, and you shiver, the line between beast and demon blurring in the dark. Then comes the shock, a jolt that snaps your breath, a scream your own rips through the silence, waking your family. You bolt upright, sweat-soaked, the dream's grip still tight. A figure in black, pointing, accusing you of sin. Your wife grabs your hand, her eyes wide, and the children whimper, sensing the terror. In 1372, a dream like this was evidence, a sign you're marked, and Father William's visit makes it clear he's watching. Your heart races, the shack closing in, and you stammer it was nothing, but the lie tastes like ash. Survival means burying this, but the fear lingers, sharp as a blade. This moment, this fragile edge between sleep and dread, shows the fierce grit it took to face a world that feared your mind. Every night you lie down is a quiet defiance of paranoia's chokehold. Compare that to today, where we have therapy and grace, yet still wrestle with shame. The weaver in you would envy our freedom, but they'd salute the shared will to endure. As you lie back, the fire's last embers fade, and you pray for dawn. Survival, then and now, is a stubborn hope, burning through the dark. In the shadowed villages of England, in 1372, the mind was a mystery wrapped in fear, a fragile vessel where divine grace battled demonic whispers. The concept of mental health, as we know it, didn't exist. Instead, the church cast every tremor of the psyche as a moral failing, a skirmish in the eternal war between God and Satan. A villager weeping too long, muttering in their sleep, or staring blankly at the horizon wasn't seen as troubled but tainted, their soul teetering on the edge of damnation. This wasn't mere superstition. It was doctrine etched into sermons and village life, like carvings in a cathedral's stone. The air of a medieval hamlet, thick with the scent of damp earth and burning tallow, carried whispers of possession as readily as it did the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. To be mad was to be a public threat, a crack in the community's fragile armor against the devil's wiles. The church, that towering arbiter of medieval life, preached that the mind was a battlefield, and any disturbance, grief, anxiety, or even vivid dreams was evidence of Satan's foothold. Imagine a weaver, hands rough from the loom, lying awake as wolves howled beyond the village. A nightmare might stir them, a vision of shadows or a voice in the dark, but they dare not speak of it. To confess such things was to invite the priest's scrutiny, his cross raised like a judge's gavel. In 1372, mental health wasn't a private struggle, but a communal verdict, with the village as jury and the church as executioner. A woman like Ellen, grieving her husband, might cry out in her sleep, only to find her pain branded as devilry. Her neighbors, once friends, would turn away, their silence sharper than any blade, fearing her madness might spread like a plague. This fear wasn't abstract. It was woven into daily life, as tangible as the mud that clung to a villager's boots. The church's teachings shaped every interaction, from the baker's gossip to the priest's sermons, creating a world where doubt was a sin and sorrow a suspicion. A man like Thomas, broken by loss, might mutter curses in his grief, but to the village, those words were Satan's script. The remedy wasn't compassion, but cleansing, prayers, fasting, or worse, confinement in a church crypt, where screams echoed off stone until the demon was driven out or the soul broke. In medieval Europe, mental health treatment was a gauntlet, often more brutal than the affliction itself. The crypt's darkness, the chain's clank, were as much a part of village life as the harvest, a grim reminder that the mind was never truly your own. The shock lies in how deeply this mindset gripped society, turning neighbors into spies and families into informants. A child might report a parent's strange behavior, not out of malice but fear, believing they were saving a soul. In 1372, a village wasn't just a community, It was a panopticon, every eye watching for signs of madness. A woman's tears, a man's silence, could spark a rumor that ended in exile or death. The Church's power was absolute, its doctrine a lens that twisted human suffering into evidence of divine wrath. To question it was heresy, a crime worse than madness itself. The weaver, the baker, the blacksmith, all lived under this shadow, their minds policed as fiercely as their deeds, their fears buried beneath prayers and forced smiles. This brutal reality reveals the resilience of those who endured it. Every day was a quiet rebellion against a world that saw the mind as a traitor. Compare that to today, where therapy and empathy offer solace, yet stigma still lingers like a medieval ghost. The villagers of 1372 would marvel at our freedom to speak of mental health, but they'd recognize the shared struggle to rise above judgment. Their courage, forged in fear, was a testament to human endurance, a thread that binds us across centuries. As the firelight faded in their shacks, they prayed for salvation, not just from demons, but from a society that punished their humanity. Survival, then and now, is a defiant act, a refusal to let the darkness win. In the villages of England in 1372, the Church was the unchallenged authority, its doctrines shaping not only spiritual life, but also perceptions of the human mind. Mental health, though not named as such, was understood through a religious lens, where disturbances like anxiety, melancholy, or hallucinations were interpreted as signs of divine disfavor or demonic possession. The prevailing theological framework held that the soul was vulnerable to Satan's influence, and any deviation from emotional stability was a moral failing requiring spiritual correction. This belief permeated every level of society, from the illiterate peasant to the educated clergy, creating an atmosphere where fear of psychological distress was as pervasive as the cold fog that blanketed medieval hamlets. The Church's stone walls, looming over every village, were both a sanctuary and a tribunal, where the troubled were judged as much as they were prayed for. The Church's teachings were rooted in a dualistic view of the world, pitting God against the devil in a cosmic struggle that played out within the human psyche. Texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, though not yet published in 1372, reflected the era's growing obsession with demonic forces, which clergy used to explain behaviors that deviated from the norm. A villager suffering from what we might now call depression or post-traumatic stress was likely seen as under spiritual attack, their condition requiring rituals such as prayer, fasting, or exorcism. These practices, administered by priests, were not designed to address psychological causes, but to restore divine order. The village priest, armed with holy water and Latin chants, was the primary authority on such matters, his role blending spiritual guidance with social control. The community, conditioned by sermons, often viewed the afflicted with suspicion, fearing their madness could invite divine wrath upon all. Exorcism, one of the Church's most dramatic interventions, was reserved for cases deemed severe, such as those exhibiting violent behavior or speaking in ways interpreted as supernatural. Historical records from the period, including ecclesiastical accounts, describe rituals involving crosses, relics, and prolonged confinement, often in church crypts or sanctified spaces. These were not gentle processes. They could involve physical restraint and psychological pressure, intended to expel the demon rather than comfort the individual. The Liber Pontificalis and other medieval texts document cases where such rituals led to death or further deterioration, yet they were accepted as necessary to protect the community's spiritual health. The fear of possession was so acute that even minor symptoms, like insomnia or excessive weeping, could prompt a family to seek a priest's intervention, hoping to avoid the stigma of a tainted household. The shock of this system lies in its pervasiveness and the lack of alternative perspectives. Unlike today, where psychological disorders are studied through neuroscience and treated with therapy or medication, medieval England offered no secular framework for understanding mental health. The Church's monopoly on knowledge meant that even educated figures, such as university-trained theologians, reinforced the demonic model. A 14th century text, De Universo by William of Auvergne, explicitly links mental disturbances to supernatural causes, reflecting the intellectual consensus of the time. This left villagers with no recourse but to conform, their fears amplified by the constant threat of social ostracism or worse, accusations of heresy or witchcraft, which could lead to execution. The community's role was not to empathize but to enforce, ensuring that the afflicted were either healed or removed. This rigid system highlights the resilience of those who lived under it. Villagers, aware of the consequences, often hid their struggles, maintaining a facade of piety to avoid scrutiny. Their endurance, though born of fear, was a testament to human adaptability in the face of oppressive structures. Compare this to modern times, where mental health is increasingly destigmatized, with resources like counseling and public awareness campaigns fostering openness. Yet the medieval villager's silent strength resonates with our own efforts to navigate societal pressures. Their world, governed by faith and fear, lacked the tools we take for granted, yet their survival through such constraints speaks to a universal tenacity. As the church bells tolled in 1372, signaling evening prayers, they carried a reminder. To falter was to risk everything, but to persevere was to claim a quiet victory over the darkness. In England in 1372, the care of those deemed mentally disturbed was a patchwork of religious and communal efforts, with the earliest institutions beginning to take shape. While modern concepts of mental health facilities were centuries away, monasteries and early hospitals, often run by religious orders, served as the primary refuges for individuals exhibiting signs of what was then called madness. These institutions, such as St. Mary of Bethlehem in London, later infamous as Bedlam, were not specialized asylums, but general hospitals that occasionally housed those with mental disturbances alongside the physically ill. The conditions within were stark, reflecting the era's limited understanding of psychological disorders. The air in these stone-walled wards carried the damp chill of unheated corridors, and the cries of the afflicted mingled with the chants of monks, creating an atmosphere where spiritual salvation was prioritized over earthly comfort. The Church's dominance meant that these early hospitals operated under a theological framework, viewing mental disturbances as spiritual afflictions requiring divine intervention. Historical records, such as those from the Registrum Episcoporum of the period, indicate that patients were subjected to regimens of prayer, fasting, and confession believed to expel demonic influences. Physical restraints, including chains or ropes, were common for those considered violent or uncontrollable, as documented in accounts of monastic hospitals like St. Bartholomew's. Food was sparse, often bread and thin broth, and hygiene was rudimentary, with little attention to sanitation. The goal was not psychological recovery, but spiritual purification, aligning with the Church's teaching that a troubled mind signaled a soul estranged from God. Patients, often brought by desperate families or local clergy, were less treated than contained, their suffering interpreted as a test of faith or a punishment for sin. The treatment methods, though harsh by modern standards, were consistent with the medical knowledge of the time, heavily influenced by the humoral theory inherited from Greco-Roman traditions. Medieval texts, such as those by Bartholomeus Anglicus in his De Proprietatibus Rerum, describe mental disturbances as imbalances of bodily humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, or black bile, requiring remedies like bloodletting or herbal concoctions. Monastic hospitals occasionally employed these methods, using leeches or crude lancets, but their application was inconsistent and often secondary to religious rituals. The Annales Monasteci recount cases where patients were bled to calm the spirit, though such practices likely exacerbated distress. The lack of trained physicians meant that monks or lay brothers, with minimal medical knowledge, oversaw care, their efforts guided more by faith than science. The result was a system that offered shelter but little hope of improvement, with many patients lingering for years or dying in confinement. The shock of this system lies in its scale and acceptance. By the late 14th century, institutions like St. Mary of Bethlehem were already overcrowded, as noted in municipal records from London, with no distinction made between mental and physical ailments. The mixing of patients, lepers, the feverish, and the mad created chaotic environments where neglect was common. Families, unable to cope with disturbed relatives, often abandoned them to these hospitals, as evidenced by church ledgers, recording payments for custody of the afflicted. The stigma of madness meant that such individuals were effectively erased from community life, their existence reduced to a footnote in monastic accounts. Unlike today's psychiatric facilities, which aim for rehabilitation, medieval hospitals served as warehouses for the unwanted, their stone walls a barrier between society and its fears. This grim reality underscores the endurance of those who navigated such a world. Villagers, aware of the hospital's conditions, often resisted sending loved ones away, choosing instead to hide their struggles within the family. Their resilience, born of necessity, reflects a profound human capacity to adapt to oppressive systems. Compare this to modern mental health care, with its focus on therapy, medication, and patient rights, yet still grappling with access and stigma. The medieval villager, confined by theology and scarcity, lacked our resources, but shared our determination to find light in the dark. Their story, preserved in dusty records and crumbling stone, is a testament to survival against overwhelming odds. As the church bells rang out in 1372, calling the faithful to Vespers, they signaled not just prayer, but a collective will to endure, a legacy that echoes in our own efforts to understand and heal the mind. In England in 1372, treatments for mental disturbances were a blend of religious ritual, rudimentary medicine, and communal intervention, all shaped by the Church's theological dominance. The absence of a concept like mental health meant that behaviors we might now recognize as symptoms of anxiety, depression, or psychosis were interpreted as spiritual afflictions, often attributed to demonic possession or divine punishment. The village priest, wielding authority over both soul and psyche, was the primary figure in addressing such cases, employing methods rooted in faith rather than empirical understanding. The air in a medieval church, heavy with incense and the murmur of Latin prayers, was the setting for many of these interventions, where the afflicted faced a gauntlet of rituals designed to restore divine favor rather than alleviate their distress. Prayer and exorcism were the cornerstones of treatment, as documented in ecclesiastical records like the Registrum Episcoporum. For those deemed possessed, often individuals exhibiting violent behavior or incoherent speech, priests performed exorcisms involving holy water, relics, and chants from the Rituale Romanum. These rituals, sometimes lasting days, aimed to expel demons, but historical accounts, such as those from the Annales Ecclesiastici, note that they could lead to physical exhaustion or death. Less severe cases, like persistent melancholy, were addressed with mandated fasting or confession, believed to cleanse the soul of sin. The Church's influence ensured that these practices were widely accepted, with villagers seeking priests' intervention at the first sign of unusual behavior, fearing both spiritual and social consequences. Beyond religious remedies, medieval medicine offered a limited arsenal, heavily influenced by the humoral theory articulated by scholars like Galen and Hippocrates. Texts such as De Proprietatibus Rerum by Bartholomeus Anglicus describe mental disturbances as imbalances of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatments included bloodletting, performed with lancets or leeches, to purge excess humors, as noted in medical compendiums like the Lilium Medicinae. Herbal remedies, such as infusions of St. John's wort or valerian, were occasionally used to calm the mind, though their application was inconsistent and often combined with prayers. Monastic hospitals, like St. Bartholomew's, employed these methods, but the lack of standardized training meant outcomes varied widely, with some patients worsening under the strain of invasive procedures. Communal practices also played a role, though they often blurred into superstition. Charms and amulets, blessed by priests or local healers, were common, as recorded in the Cartulary of St. Mary's. These were believed to ward off evil spirits, but their efficacy was untested, and their use sometimes drew the Church's ire as borderline heresy. Pilgrimages to holy sites, such as the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury, were prescribed for those whose disturbances were thought to stem from divine displeasure, with the journey itself seen as a form of penance. The Vitae Sanctorum recounts cases of miraculous recoveries at such shrines, though these were likely exceptions rather than the rule. More often, the afflicted faced social isolation as communities feared their condition could spread or invite divine wrath. The shock of these treatments lies in their brutality and the absence of empathy. Unlike modern psychiatry, which seeks to understand and treat mental disorders through therapy and medication, medieval methods prioritized spiritual conformity over individual well-being. Ecclesiastical records from the period, including those of the Bishop of London, describe patients subjected to prolonged confinement or physical restraint, sometimes resulting in injury or death. The humoral treatments, above all grounded in the era's medical theory, were often harmful, with bloodletting weakening already frail individuals. The reliance on untrained clergy or monks, as noted in the Annales Monastici, meant that care was inconsistent, with outcomes depending more on chance than skill. Families, desperate for solutions, often had no choice but to comply, their trust in the church overriding doubts about the method's efficacy. This system reveals the resilience of those who endured it. Villagers, aware of the harshness of these treatments, often sought to manage disturbances within the family, risking social stigma to protect loved ones. Their tenacity, born of necessity, reflects a profound human capacity to adapt. Compare this to today's mental health care, with its evidence-based approaches and growing acceptance, yet still facing challenges of access and stigma. The medieval villager, bound by faith and fear, lacked our tools, but shared our drive to persevere. Their story, etched in the margins of monastic ledgers, is a testament to survival in a world where the mind was both a mystery and a battleground. As the church candles burned low in 1372, they lit a path of endurance that still resonates. In England in 1372, women faced a perilous landscape where their mental states could swiftly become grounds for accusations of witchcraft, a charge that blended religious fervor with social control. The church's teachings framed women as particularly susceptible to demonic influence, a belief rooted in medieval interpretations of biblical texts like those in the Malleus Maleficarum, which, though published later in 1486, echoed earlier sentiments. Behaviors we might now recognize as symptoms of mental distress, melancholy, anxiety, or even outspokenness were often interpreted as signs of consorting with the devil. The village square, alive with the clatter of carts and the murmur of gossip, was a stage where such accusations could erupt, transforming a woman's private suffering into a public spectacle. This wasn't mere superstition, but a systemic framework that shaped how communities addressed what we now call mental health, particularly for women. The theological doctrine held that women, seen as weaker in faith and intellect, were prime targets for Satan's wiles. Ecclesiastical records, such as those from the Registrum Episcoporum of the period, document cases where women exhibiting strange behaviors, crying uncontrollably, speaking incoherently, or withdrawing from social duties, were brought before priests for scrutiny. These behaviors, potentially indicative of postpartum depression or trauma, were rarely met with empathy. Instead, they were scrutinized through a lens of suspicion, with confessions extracted through intense questioning or communal pressure. The Annales Ecclesiastici recount instances where women were subjected to rituals like exorcism or public penance, their distress framed as evidence of spiritual corruption. The village, conditioned by sermons, often participated in identifying witches, fearing that unchecked sin could bring divine punishment, such as failed harvests or plague. Legal processes, though rudimentary in 1372, were beginning to formalize around witchcraft accusations. Church courts, as noted in the Cartulary of St. Mary's, could impose penalties ranging from public humiliation, standing in a white sheet during Mass, to confinement in monastic hospitals. In severe cases, particularly as the witch hunt fervor grew in later centuries, accusations led to trials by ordeal or execution, though these were less common in the 14th century. Women accused of witchcraft were often those already marginalized, widows, spinsters, or those who defied social norms. Their mental distress, whether from grief or isolation, was weaponized against them, as seen in cases recorded in diocesan archives, where women were accused after displaying visions or fits. These accusations served a dual purpose, punishing the individual and reinforcing communal obedience to the church's authority. The shock of this system lies in its cruelty and pervasiveness. Unlike modern mental health care, which seeks to understand and treat disorders like depression or anxiety with therapy and medication, medieval England offered no such framework. The Liber Pontificalis describes women confined in church crypts, subjected to fasting or ritual cleansing, with some succumbing to physical or psychological exhaustion. Families, desperate to avoid stigma, might hide a woman's distress, but communal vigilance often exposed them. A woman's cry in the night, a moment of despair, could spark a neighbor's accusation, as documented in parish records from London. The Church's monopoly on truth meant that alternative explanations, such as medical or emotional causes, were dismissed, leaving women vulnerable to a cycle of fear and punishment. This harsh reality underscores the resilience of those who navigated it. Women, aware of the risks, often concealed their struggles, maintaining a facade of piety to protect themselves and their families. Their endurance, though born of necessity, reflects a profound human capacity to survive under oppressive systems. Compare this to today, where mental health awareness campaigns and professional support aim to destigmatize disorders, yet challenges like gender bias persist. The medieval woman, bound by theology and suspicion, lacked our resources but shared our determination to persevere. Their stories, preserved in the margins of church ledgers and court records, are a testament to survival in a world where a troubled mind could cost everything. As the church bells tolled in 1372, signaling the end of another day, they marked not just time, but the quiet strength of those who faced a society that judged their every thought. Their legacy, though buried in dusty archives, reminds us of the human spirit's tenacity, a thread that weaves through centuries to our own struggles for understanding and compassion. In England of 1372, men navigated a rigid social order where mental distress was not only stigmatized, but seen as a failure of both faith and masculinity. The church, the dominant force shaping societal norms, preached that emotional resilience was a divine mandate, particularly for men who were expected to embody strength as providers, laborers, and defenders. Displays of anxiety, despair, or what we might now recognize as depression were interpreted as weaknesses that invited demonic influence, as documented in ecclesiastical texts like the Registrum Episcoporum. The village square, bustling with the clink of blacksmiths' hammers and the creak of carts, was a stage where men performed their roles under constant scrutiny. To falter, whether through grief or fear, was to risk being branded as spiritually or socially defective, a stain that could ripple through family and community. Theological doctrine reinforced these expectations, drawing on biblical interpretations that equated emotional control with godliness. Men suffering from what medieval scholars called melancholia were often urged to seek confession or penance, as outlined in texts like De Universo by William of Auvergne, which linked excessive sorrow to a lapse in faith. A man who wept openly after losing a child or struggled with the horrors of war, common in an era of conflicts like the 100 Years' War, faced suspicion from both clergy and neighbors. Parish records from the period note cases where men were brought before church courts for behaviors deemed unmanly, such as prolonged mourning or withdrawal from communal duties. The prescribed remedies, often prayer or fasting, aimed to restore divine favor rather than address psychological pain, reflecting the era's view that mental distress was a spiritual rather than medical issue. Social pressures compounded this scrutiny, as men's roles were tightly bound to their economic and communal contributions. A farmer unable to work due to what we might now call post-traumatic stress, or a craftsman like a weaver plagued by anxiety, risked not only personal shame, but also economic ruin for his family. The Annales Monasterici document instances of men being ostracized for failing to uphold their duties, with some sent to monastic hospitals like St. Bartholomew's, where they were confined alongside the physically ill. These institutions, as noted in London's municipal records, offered minimal care, with patients subjected to bloodletting or herbal remedies based on humoral theory, as described in Lilium Medicinae. Such treatments, administered by monks with little medical training, often exacerbated distress, leaving men to languish in damp, crowded wards. The shock of this system lies in its unrelenting demand for stoicism, which left little room for human vulnerability. Unlike modern mental health frameworks that encourage emotional expression and provide therapy or medication, medieval England offered no such outlets. Church ledgers from the period reveal men who, after displaying signs of mental distress, were subjected to public penance, standing in a church in a white sheet, or even accused of heresy if their behavior suggested defiance of divine order. The community, conditioned to fear divine retribution, often enforced these norms, shunning men who failed to conform. A man's silence, though a shield against accusation, could deepen his isolation, as seen in cases where families hid their struggles to avoid stigma, only to face betrayal by neighbors eager to prove their own piety. This harsh reality underscores the resilience of those who endured it. Men in 1372, aware of the consequences, often suppressed their struggles, laboring through grief or fear to maintain their place in society. Their endurance, though driven by necessity, reflects a profound capacity to navigate oppressive structures. Compare this to today, where mental health initiatives promote open dialogue and support, yet societal expectations of masculinity still echo medieval pressures to tough it out. The medieval man, bound by faith and duty, lacked our resources, but shared our determination to persevere. Their stories, preserved in the terse entries of church records and the worn tools of their trades, are a testament to survival in a world that demanded unwavering strength. As the church bells tolled in 1372, marking the end of another day, they signaled not just prayer, but the quiet fortitude of those who carried their burdens in silence, a legacy that resonates in our ongoing efforts to redefine strength and seek healing for the mind. In the England of 1372, the shadow of the Black Death, which ravaged Europe from 1347 to 1351, lingered like a wound that refused to heal. The plague, which killed an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population, left behind not only physical devastation, but also profound psychological scars. The Church, the dominant authority, framed the catastrophe as divine punishment for humanity's sins, intensifying fears that mental distress signaled spiritual failure. Villages, still reeling from empty homes and fallow fields, buzzed with the clatter of carts and the low chants of priests. But beneath this daily rhythm was a collective trauma that reshaped how society viewed the mind. The Black Death didn't just claim bodies, it fractured communities, leaving survivors grappling with grief, fear, and a pervasive sense of doom that the Church interpreted as a call to repentance. Theological doctrine amplified these fears, portraying mental disturbances as evidence of God's wrath or demonic influence. Ecclesiastical records, such as the Annales Ecclesiastici, describe sermons that linked the plague to moral decay, urging villagers to purge their souls through confession and penance. Those who succumbed to what we might now call post-traumatic stress, manifesting as anxiety, despair, or withdrawal, were often seen as spiritually weak, their suffering a sign of divine disfavor. Parish registers from the period note cases of individuals overwhelmed by loss who exhibited behaviors like public weeping or refusal to work, only to face scrutiny from priests and neighbors. The Church's response was ritualistic: masses for the dead, public prayers, or, in extreme cases, exorcisms, as documented in the Registrum Episcoporum. These interventions aimed to restore communal harmony rather than address individual suffering, leaving the afflicted to navigate their pain in isolation. The social impact of the Black Death exacerbated these psychological burdens. With labor shortages and disrupted economies, as noted in the pipe rolls of the period, survivors faced intense pressure to rebuild, often while mourning entire families. The Church's teachings, reinforced by texts like De Universo by William of Auvergne, offered no framework for understanding trauma as a natural response to loss. Instead, behaviors like persistent sorrow were pathologized as spiritual failings, prompting interventions like fasting or confinement in monastic hospitals. The cartulary of St. Mary's records instances of villagers sent to such institutions where they were subjected to bloodletting or herbal remedies based on humoral theory, as described in Lilium Medicinae. These treatments, administered by monks with limited medical knowledge, rarely alleviated distress and sometimes worsened it, with patients enduring harsh conditions in crowded, unsanitary wards. The shock of this era lies in the scale of suffering and the absence of psychological support. Unlike modern mental health frameworks, which recognize trauma as a response to catastrophic events and offer therapy or counseling, medieval England relied on religious and communal mechanisms that prioritized control over healing. The Annales Monasticae document groups of flagellants who roamed villages whipping themselves to atone for humanity's sins, believing their pain could avert further divine punishment. This extreme behavior, born of collective fear, was both a symptom and a reinforcement of the era's psychological crisis. Communities, terrified of another plague, policed each other's behavior, as seen in parish records noting accusations against those who despaired or cursed God in their grief. The Church's authority ensured that such responses were met with penance or ostracism, further isolating the afflicted. This grim reality highlights the resilience of those who endured it. Survivors of the Black Death, aware of the social and spiritual consequences, often suppress their grief to maintain their place in the community. Their strength, though driven by necessity, reflects a profound human capacity to adapt to overwhelming loss. Compare this to today, where trauma-informed care and mental health resources offer pathways to healing, yet societal pressures to move on echo medieval expectations. The villagers of 1372, bound by faith and fear, lacked our tools but shared our determination to persevere through pain. Their stories, preserved in the terse entries of church ledgers and the silent scars of depopulated villages, are a testament to survival in a world where the mind was a battleground for divine judgment. As the church bells rang out in 1372, marking another day's end, they signaled not just prayer, but the quiet endurance of a people who faced unimaginable loss with stubborn resolve, a legacy that informs our own efforts to heal and rebuild. In England in 1372, folklore and superstition permeated every corner of village life, profoundly shaping perceptions of mental disturbances. Without a scientific framework for understanding psychological conditions, communities relied on a rich tapestry of beliefs drawn from pre-Christian traditions and church teachings. Behaviors we might now identify as symptoms of mental illness, anxiety, hallucinations, or melancholy were often attributed to supernatural causes, such as curses, fairies, or malevolent spirits. The village, alive with the creak of water wheels and the chatter of markets, buzzed with tales of unseen forces, where a troubled mind was not a medical issue, but a sign of otherworldly interference. These beliefs, passed down through oral traditions and reinforced by local healers, offered explanations for the inexplicable, but they also deepened the stigma surrounding those who suffered. The church, while dominant, coexisted with these older superstitions, often blending them into its own doctrine. Ecclesiastical records, such as those in the cartulary of St. Mary's, describe villagers seeking charms or amulets from local wise women or cunning men, believed to protect against evil spirits that caused mental unrest. These objects, often inscribed with Christian symbols or herbs like vervain, were thought to ward off curses or fairy mischief, as noted in medieval texts like the Liber Pontificalis. However, the Church viewed such practices with suspicion, occasionally condemning them as heretical, yet their popularity persisted, as seen in parish accounts of payments for protective talismans. This uneasy coexistence meant that a villager suffering from what we might call psychosis could be treated with a priest's prayers one day and a healer's charm the next, with little consistency or efficacy. Superstitions also fueled communal responses to mental distress. Folklore held that certain actions, like spilling salt or walking under a ladder, could invite spiritual harm, potentially leading to a disturbed mind. The Annales Monastitsi record cases where individuals exhibiting erratic behavior were believed to have been elf-shot or cursed by a neighbor's envy, prompting rituals to lift the supposed hex. These rituals, often involving chants, offerings, or the burning of specific herbs, were performed by local healers whose knowledge was a mix of herbalism and mysticism. Such practices, while rooted in community tradition, could escalate fear, as villagers suspected each other of casting curses, leading to accusations that mirrored later witchcraft trials. The Registrum Episcoporum notes instances where individuals were shunned or brought before church courts for allegedly causing mental disturbances through supernatural means. The shock of this system lies in its pervasive influence and the absence of rational alternatives. Unlike modern mental health care, which relies on evidence-based therapies and medications, medieval England's approach was a patchwork of faith and folklore, often exacerbating the suffering it sought to address. Parish records from London describe villagers who, after receiving charms or undergoing rituals, faced worsening conditions due to the stress of communal scrutiny or ineffective treatments. The Church's dominance meant that even well-meaning healers operated under its shadow, their remedies tainted by the fear of heresy. A woman's persistent sadness or a man's vivid dreams could spark rumors of supernatural tampering, leading to social isolation or harsher interventions like exorcism, as documented in diocesan archives. This cycle of fear and superstition left little room for understanding or compassion. This reality underscores the resilience of those who lived within it. Villagers, aware of the risks, often hid their distress or sought discreet help from trusted healers, navigating a world where every action was scrutinized. Their endurance, driven by necessity, reflects a profound human capacity to adapt to a lack of understanding. Compare this to today, where mental health is increasingly supported by science and advocacy, yet echoes of stigma persist in cultural attitudes. The medieval villager, bound by superstition and faith, lacked our tools but shared our determination to find solace. Their stories, preserved in the oral traditions and sparse records of the time, are a testament to survival in a world where the mind was a mystery to be feared. As the church bells tolled in 1372, marking the rhythm of daily life, they signaled not just time, but the quiet strength of those who faced their fears with whatever tools, charms, prayers, or sheer will they could muster. Their legacy, though rooted in superstition, speaks to a universal human drive to seek meaning and healing in the face of the unknown. In England of 1372, amidst the clanging bells and creaking carts of village life, music and art offered rare moments of solace for minds burdened by the era's harsh realities. The church, the dominant force in shaping medieval culture, wielded these creative expressions primarily as tools for worship, yet their impact on the psyche was undeniable. Gregorian chants echoed through stone cathedrals, their haunting melodies filling the air with a sense of divine order, while illuminated manuscripts, with their vivid colors and intricate designs, adorned monastic libraries. Those art forms, though rooted in religious purpose, provided an emotional outlet for a society where mental distress was often misunderstood as spiritual failing. For villagers grappling with what we might now call anxiety or depression, the rhythms of a hymn or the glow of a painted page offered fleeting comfort in a world quick to judge the troubled mind. The church's music, particularly Gregorian chant, was a cornerstone of medieval spiritual life, as documented in liturgical texts like the Graduale Romanum. These monophonic melodies, sung in Latin during Masses and Vespers, were designed to elevate the soul toward God, but their repetitive, soothing cadences also calmed restless minds. Ecclesiastical records from the period, such as those in the Registrum Episcoporum, note that villagers attended services not only for salvation, but also for the emotional reprieve of music, which filled the cavernous churches with a sense of unity. While the church did not explicitly recognize music as a mental health remedy, its effect was profound, offering a structured outlet for emotions that could not be expressed openly. A villager, weighed down by grief or fear, might find temporary peace in the chant's steady flow, a brief escape from the village's scrutiny. Visual art, particularly in the form of illuminated manuscripts and church frescoes, played a similar role. Manuscripts like the Lindisfarne Gospels, with their intricate knotwork and vibrant hues, were created by monks to glorify God, but their beauty captivated all who saw them. Parish records from London describe villagers gathering to view such works during feast days, their eyes drawn to images of saints and heavenly scenes. These artworks, as noted in De Proprietatibus Rerum by Bartholomeus Anglicus, were believed to inspire divine contemplation, yet they also provided a visual refuge for those overwhelmed by earthly struggles. A woman mourning a lost child, or a man haunted by war, might find solace in the serene faces of painted angels, their gilded halos a promise of a world beyond pain. The Church's control ensured these images served its narrative, but their emotional impact transcended doctrine. The shock of this era lies in the paradox of art's role. While it offered comfort, it was tightly bound to the Church's agenda, leaving no room for secular expressions of mental distress. Unlike modern therapeutic practices, which use music and art to process emotions directly, medieval creations were filtered through religious purpose, as seen in the Annales Monasticii accounts of music used in exorcism rituals. Villagers had no framework to articulate their struggles outside the Church's lens, and those who sought solace in art risked accusations of idolatry if they strayed too far from approved forms. Parish records note cases where individuals inspired by visions from religious art were scrutinized for heresy, their emotional responses mistook for demonic influence. This rigid control meant that even moments of beauty were tinged with fear, a stark contrast to today's use of art therapy to foster healing. This reality highlights the resilience of those who found comfort in such constrained spaces. Villagers, aware of the Church's watchful eye, turned to chants and images as quiet acts of survival, drawing strength from their beauty despite the risk. Their tenacity reflects a human capacity to seek light in oppressive systems. Compare this to today, where music and art therapy are recognized as tools for mental health, offering safe spaces to explore emotions. The medieval villager, bound by faith and fear, lacked our resources, but shared our instinct to find solace in creativity. Their stories, preserved in the worn pages of manuscripts and the faded notes of chants, testify to a quiet endurance. As the church candles flickered in 1372, casting shadows on painted walls, they illuminated not just worship, but the stubborn human drive to find peace, a legacy that echoes in our modern efforts to heal through art and sound. In England in 1372, the understanding of mental disturbances was shaped not only by the church, but also by a thin thread of medical philosophy inherited from classical and Islamic scholars. The church's dominance cast a long shadow, but ideas from thinkers like Avicenna and Galen filtered through monastic libraries, offering a semblance of intellectual inquiry into the human mind. The air of a scholar's study, thick with the musty scent of parchment and candle wax, was a rare space where questions about the psyche were probed, albeit through a lens of humoral theory and spiritual caution. While villagers faced accusations of demonic possession for their distress, learned men grappled with theories that linked body and mind, though these ideas were often distorted by the era's theological constraints. This interplay between philosophy and faith created a complex, if limited, framework for addressing what we now call mental health. The humoral theory, rooted in the works of Hippocrates and Galen, was the cornerstone of medieval medical thought, as seen in texts like Lilium Medicinae by Bernard de Gordon. It posited that health, including mental stability, depended on the balance of four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Disturbances such as melancholy or mania were attributed to an excess or deficiency of these substances, as described in De Proprietatibus Rerum by Bartholomeus Anglicus. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine translated into Latin and studied in European monasteries, further refined these ideas, suggesting that mental states were influenced by physical conditions like diet or environment. A scholar in 1372 might prescribe bloodletting or herbal remedies, such as poppy or mandrake, to restore balance, as noted in monastic records from St. Bartholomew's. Yet, these treatments were often administered by monks with minimal training, leading to inconsistent outcomes. The Church's influence meant that even philosophical inquiries were subordinate to theological doctrine. Avicenna's notion of a spiritual breath linking body and mind, as referenced in his De Anima, was reinterpreted to align with Christian beliefs about the soul, as seen in the writings of Thomas Aquinas. Behaviors we might now recognize as symptoms of depression or anxiety were often explained as spiritual failings, with medical treatments secondary to prayer or confession. Ecclesiastical records, such as the Registrum Episcoporum, document cases where scholars advised combining humoral remedies with religious rituals, reflecting the era's uneasy blend of science and faith. A villager suffering from what we'd call psychosis might receive a concoction of herbs alongside an exorcism, the priest's chants overshadowing the physician's lancet. This fusion limited the effectiveness of philosophical insights, as treatments remained tethered to the Church's view of mental distress as sin. The shock of this system lies in its intellectual rigidity and practical inefficacy. Unlike modern psychiatry, which uses evidence-based methods like cognitive therapy or medication, medieval medicine was constrained by a lack of empirical testing and the Church's authority. The Annales Monastici recount cases where patients, subjected to bloodletting or purging, deteriorated due to weakened physical states, yet these methods persisted due to their alignment with accepted theory. Scholars, often monks themselves, faced accusations of heresy if they strayed too far from doctrine, as seen in the condemnation of certain medical texts in church councils. Villagers, unaware of these debates, had little access to such treatments anyway, relying on priests or local healers whose remedies were equally ineffective. The gap between philosophical inquiry and practical care left most sufferers without meaningful relief, their distress compounded by social stigma. This reality underscores the resilience of those who lived under such constraints. Villagers denied access to scholarly knowledge, endured their struggles through faith or secrecy, their survival a testament to human tenacity. Compare this to today, where neuroscience and therapy offer precise tools for mental health, yet access remains uneven, echoing medieval disparities. The scholars of 1372, laboring over Latin texts by candlelight, sought understanding in a world that feared the mind's mysteries, their efforts a faint precursor to our own. Their story, preserved in the brittle pages of monastic manuscripts, reflects a persistent human drive to make sense of suffering. As the church bells tolled in 1372, marking the scholar's late-night study, they signaled not just time, but the quiet courage of those who sought answers in an age of shadows, a legacy that informs our ongoing quest to heal the mind. In the England of 1372, the stigma surrounding mental disturbances cast a long shadow over village life, transforming personal struggles into communal exile. The church, wielding unchallenged authority, framed behaviors we might now recognize as mental illness, such as anxiety, depression, or hallucinations, as signs of demonic possession or divine punishment. This theological lens turned the afflicted into outcasts, their distress a perceived threat to the community's spiritual health. The village, alive with the creak of looms and the clatter of market stalls, buzzed with whispers that could ruin a life faster than a failed harvest. A man who wept too long, or a woman who spoke to unseen figures, risked not just judgment, but banishment, their place in the community erased as swiftly as a name scratched from a church ledger. The church's teachings, rooted in texts like De Universo by William of Auvergne, declared that a troubled mind was a soul adrift, vulnerable to Satan's influence. Ecclesiastical records, such as the Registrum Episcoporum, document cases where individuals exhibiting signs of what we might call psychosis or melancholy were brought before priests for scrutiny. The community, conditioned by sermons, played a vigilant role, reporting strange behaviors to avoid divine wrath, as seen in parish records from London. A villager's prolonged silence or erratic speech could spark accusations, leading to public penance, standing in a white sheet during Mass, or confinement in a monastic hospital like St. Mary of Bethlehem. These institutions, as noted in the Annales Monastici, were less about healing and more about containment, their damp stone walls housing the afflicted alongside lepers and the feverish, with little distinction. Social isolation was both a punishment and a precaution. Families, fearing the stigma of a mad relative, often hid their loved ones, as documented in the Cartulary of St. Mary's, which records payments to keep disturbed individuals out of sight. Yet communal vigilance made secrecy difficult. Neighbors, eager to prove their piety, reported anything from excessive weeping to vivid dreams, as seen in diocesan archives. The Church's doctrine amplified this fear, teaching that madness was contagious, a spiritual plague that could taint an entire village. Those accused faced ostracism, their homes avoided, their names whispered as warnings. The Liber Pontificalis recounts instances where individuals were driven from their villages, left to wander or perish, their mental distress marking them as pariahs in a society that prized conformity above compassion. The shock of this system lies in its relentless cruelty and the absence of empathy. Unlike modern mental health frameworks, which emphasize understanding and support through therapy or medication, medieval England offered no such recourse. The Annales Ecclesiasticis describes cases where the afflicted, subjected to exorcisms or bloodletting, suffered further harm, their conditions worsened by harsh treatments or social rejection. The Church's monopoly on truth meant that alternative explanations, medical, emotional, or environmental, were dismissed, leaving villagers to navigate their struggles in fear. A man grieving a lost family or a woman overwhelmed by childbirth's toll could find no solace, only suspicion, as their pain was twisted into evidence of sin. The community, bound by fear of divine retribution, enforced this stigma, creating a cycle where isolation deepened distress, as evidenced by parish records noting suicides among the shunned. This grim reality underscores the resilience of those who endured it. Villagers, aware of the consequences, often suppressed their struggles, maintaining a facade of normalcy to protect their families. Their endurance, though born of necessity, reflects a profound human capacity to survive under oppressive systems. Compare this to today, where mental health advocacy seeks to dismantle stigma, offering resources like counseling and community support, yet challenges persist in overcoming judgment. The medieval villager, bound by theology and fear, lacked our tools, but shared our determination to persevere. Their stories, preserved in the terse entries of church records and in the silent scars of abandoned homes, are a testament to survival in a world where a troubled mind was a sentence of exile. As the church bells tolled in 1372, marking another day's end, they signaled not just time, but the quiet strength of those who faced isolation with stubborn resolve, a legacy that echoes in our ongoing efforts to foster understanding and compassion for the mind's struggles. In England of 1372, faith was the cornerstone of existence, offering a flicker of hope for those grappling with mental distress in a world quick to judge. The church taught that salvation awaited the faithful, a promise that resonated in villages where the toll of bells punctuated daily life. For those suffering from what we might now call depression or anxiety, this belief in divine redemption provided a lifeline, however tenuous. The air of a medieval church, thick with incense and candle smoke, was a space where the afflicted sought solace, clinging to the idea that enduring their trials could secure eternal peace. Ecclesiastical records, like the Registrum Episcoporum, note villagers flocking to masses, their prayers a desperate bid to cleanse their minds of perceived sin. The Church's doctrine, rooted in texts like De Universo by William of Auvergne, framed mental disturbances as tests of faith, with salvation as the ultimate reward. Parish records describe individuals who, overwhelmed by grief or fear, sought priests' blessings or made pilgrimages to shrines like St. Thomas Becket's in Canterbury, hoping for miraculous relief. These acts, though not therapeutic in a modern sense, offered a sense of purpose, as seen in the Vitae Sanctorum accounts of healings attributed to divine intervention. Yet the Church's focus on spiritual purity often ignored the root causes of distress, leaving many to suffer in silence, their hope tethered to an afterlife rather than earthly relief. The shock lies in the era's reliance on faith over understanding. Unlike modern mental health care, with its therapy and medications, medieval England offered only prayer and penance, as documented in the Annales Monastici. This left villagers to endure their struggles with little practical support, their resilience a testament to human tenacity. Compare this to today, where we seek evidence-based solutions, yet still find solace in hope. The medieval villager's faith, though bound by fear, reflects a shared drive to persevere. Their story, etched in church ledgers, underscores a timeless human strength, a legacy that echoes in our own quest for healing and redemption. In England in 1372, the rigid framework of church-dominated views on mental disturbances began to face subtle challenges as the seeds of the Renaissance stirred in distant intellectual circles. The Church's grip, ironclad with its doctrine of demonic possession and divine punishment, held sway in villages where the clatter of looms and the toll of bells set life's rhythm. Yet, by the late 14th century, scholars in European universities, influenced by rediscovered classical texts and Islamic philosophers like Avicenna, started questioning the purely spiritual explanations for what we now call mental illness. The air of monastic scriptoriums, heavy with the scent of ink and vellum, was where these ideas took root, though their impact on the common villager remained faint as a whisper drowned by a sermon's roar. The Church's teachings, as seen in texts like De Universo by William of Auvergne, framed mental distress as a moral failing, but scholars like Roger Bacon began advocating observation over dogma, as noted in his Opus Majus. These early stirrings, though limited, suggested that mental states might have natural causes, not just supernatural ones. Ecclesiastical records, such as the Registrum Episcoporum, show resistance to these ideas, with church authorities condemning secular explanations as heretical. Villagers, far from these debates, continued to face exorcisms or confinement for behaviors like melancholy, as documented in the Annales Monastici. The Church's control ensured that new ideas trickled slowly, leaving most to suffer under old doctrines. The shock lies in the era's resistance to change. Unlike modern psychiatry, with its scientific methods, medieval England clung to faith-based remedies, often harming the afflicted, as seen in parish records of failed cleansings. The resilience of villagers enduring such systems speaks to their tenacity. Compare this to today, where science drives mental health care, yet progress is still uneven. The medieval struggle recorded in dusty ledgers mirrors our own push for understanding, a testament to human persistence in seeking truth amidst fear. In England of 1372, mental distress was a labyrinth of fear, trapped within the Church's ironclad doctrines, where the toll of village bells signaled both prayer and judgment. Behaviors we now recognize as depression or anxiety were labeled as demonic possession or divine wrath, as recorded in the Registrum Episcoporum. Treatments like exorcism or bloodletting, detailed in the Annales Monastici, often worsened suffering, offering no understanding of the mind's complexities. The village square, alive with the clatter of carts, was a stage for communal scrutiny where a troubled soul risked ostracism or worse. This era's approach, devoid of scientific insight, left villagers to endure their pain in silence, their resilience quiet defiance against a world that saw their struggles as sin. Contrast this with today's mental health landscape, where science illuminates the mind's shadows. Therapies like CBT, medications like SSRIs, and advocacy campaigns, as seen in modern health initiatives, aim to destigmatize and heal. Yet echoes of medieval stigma linger, judgment for seeking help or admitting weakness, a faint ghost of 14th century paranoia. The Lilium Medicinae once prescribed leeches for melancholy. Now we prescribe dialogue and drugs, but access remains uneven, mirroring medieval disparities. The shock lies in the persistence of stigma across centuries, a reminder that progress is incomplete. The medieval villager, bound by faith and fear, found strength in enduring a system that offered no mercy. Their stories, etched in church ledgers, reflect a tenacity we still draw upon when facing our own mental battles. Modern tools, therapists, hotlines would astonish them, yet their grit resonates in our push for openness. As the candles burned low in 1372, they lit a path of survival, a legacy that informs our ongoing fight to understand and heal the mind. In England of 1372, the understanding of mental distress was a grim tapestry woven from fear and faith, where village bells tolled not just for prayer, but for judgment. The Church's doctrine, as seen in texts like De Universo, cast behaviors we now call mental illness as demonic or sinful, leaving the afflicted to face exorcisms or isolation, as recorded in the Annales Monastici. The village, alive with the creak of looms, was a crucible of suspicion where a troubled mind could mean social death. This harsh worldview, though rooted in ignorance, left a lasting mark, influencing how societies grappled with the mind's mysteries for centuries, from the witch trials to early asylums. The shock lies in how these medieval beliefs echo in modern culture. The stigma of mental illness, though softened by science, persists in whispers of shame, a faint shadow of 1372's paranoia. Literature and film, from The Crucible to The Witch, draw on this legacy, dramatizing the era's fear of the mad. The Registrum Episcoporum shows villagers enduring through silence. Today, we fight stigma with therapy and advocacy, yet the battle continues. The medieval villagers' resilience, facing a world with no tools but faith, mirrors our own tenacity in seeking understanding. Their story, etched in dusty ledgers, reminds us to cherish our progress and persist in healing the mind. In the sun-scorched villages of ancient Egypt, circa 1550-1070 BCE, mental distress was as alien a concept as the distant Nile's source, yet it was woven into the fabric of a society ruled by gods and pharaohs. The air, heavy with the scent of baked mud and lotus, carried no term for mental health, but behaviors we might now call anxiety or depression were interpreted through a spiritual lens, as recorded in papyri like the Ebers Papyrus. Egyptians saw the mind as intertwined with the heart, the seat of thought and emotion, and disturbances were often attributed to divine displeasure or malevolent spirits. Priests, wielding incantations and amulets, were the primary caregivers, their temples both sanctuaries and clinics for the afflicted. A villager's cries or visions, far from being medical symptoms, were signs of supernatural interference, demanding rituals to appease gods like Sekhmet or Thoth. Theological and magical frameworks dominated, as seen in texts like the Book of the Dead, which prescribed spells to protect the soul. The Edwin Smith Papyrus hints at early medical observations, noting head injuries affecting behavior, but such insights were overshadowed by spiritual remedies. Priests performed rituals involving chants, offerings, or amulets inscribed with protective symbols, as documented in temple records from Thebes. These treatments, though rooted in faith, offered no understanding of psychological causes, leaving the afflicted to endure their suffering under the weight of divine judgment. The community, fearful of spiritual contagion, often isolated those deemed touched, their distress a threat to the cosmic order. The shock lies in the stark contrast with medieval Europe's later demon-centric views. While both cultures saw mental distress as supernatural, Egypt's approach, blending magic with medicine, was less punitive, though equally ineffective. Unlike today's psychiatry, with its therapy and medications, ancient Egypt offered rituals over reason, as seen in the Papyrus Anastasi. The resilience of its people, enduring without understanding, mirrors medieval struggles. Their story, carved in hieroglyphs, echoes our gratitude for modern tools, yet honors their tenacity in a world where the mind was a divine mystery. In the sun-baked villages of ancient Egypt and the fog-draped hamlets of medieval England, the human mind was a riddle wrapped in divine mystery, its struggles interpreted through the prisms of gods and demons. In Egypt, circa 1550-1070 BCE, the air heavy with lotus and Nile mud, mental distress was seen as a sign of divine wrath or spiritual imbalance, as recorded in the Ebers Papyrus. Priests wielded incantations and amulets to appease deities like Thoth, their temples echoing with chants meant to restore cosmic harmony. In England of 1372, the church's bells tolled a sterner verdict, labeling behaviors we now call anxiety or depression as demonic possession, as noted in the Registrum Episcoporum. Both civilizations, separated by millennia, shared a common thread, a profound fear of the mind's chaos, addressed not with understanding, but with rituals that offered little relief. Egyptian treatments, detailed in papyri like the Edwin Smith, occasionally hinted at physical causes, such as head injuries affecting behavior, but these were overshadowed by spiritual remedies. Priests prescribed spells or offerings, as seen in Theban temple records, viewing the heart, the seat of thought, as vulnerable to divine displeasure. In medieval England, the Church's grip was tighter, with texts like De Universo by William of Auvergne framing mental disturbances as moral failings. Exorcisms, fasting, or confinement in places like St. Mary of Bethlehem, as documented in the Annales Monastici, were standard, often harming more than healing. The village square, alive with cart clatter or Nile-side chatter, was a stage for judgment, where the afflicted faced isolation or worse, their distress a threat to communal order in both worlds. The shock lies in the parallels. Both societies, despite their differences, saw mental distress as a supernatural failing, leaving sufferers to navigate stigma with no framework for healing. Egyptian villagers, as per the Papyrus Anastasi, endured through rituals, while medieval records show people hiding their pain to avoid the crypt's chains. Neither had our modern tools, therapy, medication, or neuroscience, yet both displayed a stubborn resilience, quiet defiance against systems that offered no mercy. The Liber Pontificalis and Egyptian inscriptions alike tell of communities enforcing conformity, yet individuals persisted, their endurance a testament to human tenacity. Compare this to today, where mental health is illuminated by science, yet stigma lingers like a medieval ghost. We have CBT and SSRIs, but access remains uneven, echoing ancient disparities. The Egyptian weaver, chanting to Thoth, and the medieval villager, praying under a priest's gaze, would marvel at our openness, but recognize the shared struggle to rise above judgment. Their stories, carved in hieroglyphs or scrawled in church ledgers, highlight a universal drive to survive. The bells of 1372 and the Nile's flow in 1550 BCE marked not just time, but the grit of those who faced their minds' shadows with whatever tools they had, faith, silence, or sheer will. Their legacy, preserved in dusty records, reminds us to cherish our progress while honoring the resilience that binds us across centuries, a quiet strength that fuels our own quest for understanding and healing. Tonight, we wandered through medieval England's shadowed paths, where minds trembled under faith's heavy gaze, and drifted to Egypt's sunlit sands, where gods judged the heart's unrest. The weaver's fears, the priest's chants, the Nile's whispers, they linger like echoes of a distant dream. Let your shoulders soften, your breath slow, and the day's weight slip into the night's embrace. If your eyes still linger on the stars, share a thought below. What stirred your soul? Tomorrow, another tale awaits, ready to cradle you into sleep's gentle arms. For now, rest easy, wrapped in the quiet strength of those who endured long ago, their resilience a soft lullaby for your weary mind. Close your eyes, dear listener, and drift under the glow of a history that never fades. Good night.